the U.S. and presumably our allies have been thinking this through, and more importantly, communicating with Russia that such a use of nuclear weapons would bring about this, again, catastrophic response, which I would assume would include targeting of Russian forces in Ukraine and on the Black Sea. And it would, I am quite confident, be very, very devastating to Russian forces there. Let's keep in mind as well, though, that just the cost-benefit analysis here for Vladimir Putin, who, of course, is in an incredibly desperate situation, to use tactical nuclear weapons would actually not reverse Russia's fortunes on the battlefield. It would be very destructive, very lethal in a specific area on that battlefield, but it would not reverse this reality that confronts Russia. And that is the real new development, I think, in Ukraine, which is demonstrated by the Ukrainian successful offensive. But what is behind that is the fact that the Ukrainians have decisively won the battle of force generation. In other words, from the very beginning, they mobilized completely. And now this country of less than a third the population of Russia has a much larger army in the field in Ukraine. It is vastly better equipped. Of course, $15.1 billion worth of military hardware and ammunition and assistance from the United States alone, and plenty more from our NATO allies and other Western countries throughout the world. And now they are bringing these new forces and capabilities to bear in a very effective manner on the battlefield. There's nothing that Russia can do to reverse this situation. It is certainly a possibility. That possibility has to be taken very seriously. I don't think it is that likely. But again, something so dangerous and horrific does have to be taken seriously. Clearly, as Jake Sullivan indicated, we are taking it very seriously. And more importantly, we are communicating with Russia and with the leadership there, presumably, in a general way, what the response would be to obviously deter them, to dissuade them from taking this decision. If anything, it will unite Ukraine even more against Russia. It will unite NATO even more against Russia. It will result in additional very, very tough sanctions, financial, economic, personal. This could be the moment where Russia is finally declared a state sponsor of terror, perhaps even war crimes charges are levied against Putin. I think this takes the gloves off in terms of the Western response. This partial mobilization, what it has done is prompted demonstrations, all kinds of disruptions around Russia. Certainly this has brought out enormous demonstrations in Russia, the size that we haven't seen for a very long period of time. And of course, he feared this. This is why he hesitated as long as he did, noting that, he's already carried out three, in a sense, partial mobilizations before this. They carried out one that was before the invasion for the training. They did a subsequent one, and then they had a more recent one, which struck me as just flat ludicrous. It was basically to tell every Russian republic in the Federation to provide a battalion's worth of soldiers. I mean, that's not how you create trained, equipped, organized, cohesive, well-led, and so forth, capable organizations. That's sort of what we did in the Revolutionary War, in our hour of greatest need, where every town came up with its own militia. This is not how you create modern, capable combat forces. So again, he is in a very, very serious and very desperate situation. And again, I'm not sure how widespread the recognition is that this is actually irreversible for him, assuming, and it's a good assumption, that the US and other NATO and Western countries will continue to provide the very robust military support that we have been giving to Ukraine. The challenge when it comes to the M1 tank produced by the US is that it is so heavy and it is so difficult to maintain that I think there are just serious reservations that we're going to get this 70-ton plus beast. This is basically a jet engine surrounded by heavy armor with a huge cannon on it. Keep in mind, it's a 1,500 horsepower, basically jet turbine. This is not a diesel engine, traditional. And having had lots of M1s in units under my command in combat, I can tell you that the maintenance requirements are enormous. You have to have all kinds of diagnostics, very highly trained technicians, mechanics, and everything is so heavy. They're literally much heavier than any other tank in the world. So you have to then also not only do you have to have an M1 tank, you have to have an M1 tank recovery vehicle, which is of course on an M1 tank chassis. If it breaks out in the eastern part of the country, you're going to have to get it back out to Poland to repair it. Well, then that means you have to have a lowboy that is sufficient to carry a 70-ton tank all that distance. Do the bridges stand up to this? Can the roads take it? Again, these are the concerns, I think, when it comes to the M1. And curiously, Germany wants the U.S. to provide just a few first so that will validate, and then they could provide theirs. I think my sense is the Leopard would be more easily maintained. Well, what I would like to see first, frankly, is scour for every T-72, T-64, T-80 that might be in the arsenals of NATO countries still. Most of those have been provided to Ukraine by this point in time, but there may still be others. The Ukrainians know how to operate them, maintain them, repair them, have the ammunition for them, and all the rest of that. And then with a promise to backfill those with Leopard 2s or M1s or what have you. That, I think, is the first course of action. Let's keep in mind, by the way, that I think it is accurate to say that Ukraine has vastly more tanks now than it had at the start of the war, because it has captured about a third or more of the Russian systems that they took out. Again, I don't want to get too caught up on this particular issue, because you start to lose sight of how enormous the assistance has been. Let me give you just a tiny bit of math just about heavy artillery. So the United States alone has provided 126 155 millimeter howitzers. These are heavy artillery pieces, and trucks to carry them, because the hydraulics don't work all that well without that. Then we're providing, I think we're about 750,000 rounds of artillery at this point in time for that particular cannon. Now, you can only put about 40 to 45 rounds per 5-ton truck. So do the math and realize how many tens of thousands of trucks have to go from the border with Poland out to the east or the south just to get those to the artillery pieces. But that gives you a sense of how massive these numbers are. And again, as somebody who was part of an invasion of a country as a 2-star general and shot a fair amount of artillery and rockets and missiles, these numbers are just mind-boggling. I mean, yes, it's a very different war, to be sure, but what has been provided is just truly incredible. And a subset of both the artillery rounds and the rocket rounds that we're providing for the multiple launch rocket system we have provided are so precise that they can land on a dinner table. These rounds cost over $100,000 a piece. And I think we've provided roughly 1,000 or so of those from the artillery, and maybe a like number for the rockets. This is a subset of those because, again, the cost of these is so enormous, and our own arsenals are only so big.